Welcome to the first day of your new reality. Your world as you know it will never be the same. It's time to wake up and see the world as it is. Welcome to the Year 2045 podcast. I'm your futurist and host, Rami Kalla. And in our podcast, we're going to bring on guest speakers to talk about virtual and augmented reality, mixed reality, AI, robots, and Skynet, and much, much more. So hang on and let's go. Hi, everybody. This is Rami Kalla with Point in Time Studios. Welcome to Year 2045. Super excited today to have on our show Kieran. Kieran, who's been working in augmented reality for the past 6 years with a background in mobile AR, content marketing, and brand partnerships. In early 2018, he joined Rokid, a Chinese AI company with a successful smart home assistant line in China, who have spent the past 3 years developing lightweight AR smart glass product line, launching this year with Rokid Glass for Enterprise. Welcome, Kieran.
Glad to be here, Rami. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, we're super glad that you're here. Thanks for being here. Yeah, give us, if you could, a little background about yourself to start off.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose a kind of high-level overview of me is I currently work for a company called Rokid, who you just introduced. But previously, I started out working in television. I've worked in video games and motion capture. And then I worked in mobile AR on a platform side and a content creation studio. And now I'm working in hardware. I think beyond that, the kind of very, very early life of me is I grew up in a tiny village in Wales with a few hundred people, and there wasn't really anything to do. And there was,
Sure.
We didn't have broadband for a long time. We were on DSL for a long, long time. So I think what kind of happened in my past is that I had to learn how to use my imagination to have fun. And I became really interested in storytelling. And I've kind of progressed and followed storytelling as a kind of arc that is hinging everything I'm doing. So I was interested in storytelling in television, in movies, in video games, the kind of agency that brings. And then beyond that, about 6 years ago, I decided to move into tech because I was interested in the new types of mediums that are open to us using kind of spatial storytelling and using augmented reality to engage and tell new stories in new ways that we haven't really understood and we're still yet to clearly define.
Very cool. Yeah, I think people get caught up a lot of times in the technology and they forget that it really is about storytelling. And, those of us that started before, a lot of the tech was available or didn't have, like you said, access to a lot of the technology. It was, using your imagination, and now we get to use it with technology. That's really cool. That's awesome.
Right.
What got you started in this field?
So I went to work basically taking ownership of AR experiences for a content producing studio. So it was simultaneously like an AR platform where they had their own content creation platform that would be licensed to people. But then also the other kind of pillar of the business was that they had an in-house content creation studio that made content for some of the world's biggest brands and licenses, people like Disney, like NBC Universal, these kinds of partners.
Wow.
And I sort of went in taking my sort of previous background in video games and television, and I went in to sort of produce and sort of product manage these experiences. And what I learned really early on is that there are some huge pitfalls to fall into if you start thinking about spatial and 3D design that you can't really learn without trying.
Right.
And it's just one of those things that you never really imagine. So, for example, I mean, in terms of if you're using a device to track a kind of single plane that's on a table, let's say it's a business card, you're looking at a table through a device,
right? And
you've got an augmented asset, maybe it's like a 3D cat or something that comes out of the business card. And it's that if you want to make that cat walk around the table, in the early days of the tech, the moment you take the camera away from the target, which is the card itself, the experience breaks. So you have to keep that in mind. You've got to consider how you're designing an experience that not only is immersive in the ways you want it to be, but also is being constrained by the specifics of the hardware and the technology of the time. And that, that's one of the things I'd never really considered. I'd say kind of beyond that, one of the things I sort of took that when I went to then speak to sort of large brands and licenses of the world, like one of the first things I'd say to people as I went into meetings was, have you considered how a consumer will engage with your brand in Z space, in depth? For example, do you want to allow a consumer to put their hand through your logo? And that gives people pause because you have, brands with very clearly defined identities that have not considered how their brand is interacted with in depth. And if you can give people pause like that, and we're talking about some leading brands and licenses, then that just makes people think. And then, it's really, you can take the conversation in interesting new ways. One thing I have noticed in the past couple of years is the more and more of these meetings that I go to with different brands, it's more often now that they're saying, hey, yeah, actually, we have a style guide. We have brand guidelines for how this stuff works. And when you go into a meeting with someone like that, that they're really thinking about the future.
Right. And it's so cool because it really takes, where we saw interactive marketing and allowing people to interact with your brand. I mean, holograms and AR really take it to a whole nother level that people have, I think are really excited about. That's awesome. Very cool.
Right.
Can you explain to our audience a little bit about, I know you mentioned spatial, a little bit what spatial means in mixed reality?
Sure. So this kind of topic is interesting, and it's kind of hard for people to grasp if they've never really experienced it. But at its base, we should think of reality and virtual reality and all these other forms and sort of things that people are coining as existing on a spectrum. And on one side, we have reality as the world that we see it. And on the other side, we have virtual reality, which is a fully enclosed virtual environment. There's no reality in there at all. And then somewhere in between, you get all of these other things, these augmented reality, mixed reality, kind of XR, spatial. But so the thing that's confusing about it is that augmented reality and everything in between, there's a drastic change in the type of experience that you can get, because an overlay on a fighter pilot cockpit is technically augmented reality, and that's where the term began. An overlay on, let's say, a Google Glass, for example, and the way that provides an overlay or sort of heads-up display of information, that is technically augmented reality. But in the same way, a Magic Leap provides technically augmented reality, but that's now spatial content that you can interact with and walk around with. And the fact that those experiences differ greatly is where the sort of confusion comes around. So when people talk about mixed reality, I mean, that, to my knowledge, and I could be incorrect, but to my knowledge, that phrase kind of came around when Microsoft decided that they wanted to distance themselves from the confusing term that was augmented reality, and they wanted to create a new term that people could associate with their brand. Microsoft are that small company that Bill Gates started so that he could eventually actualize his dream of curing malaria, right? But the fact is that if they're doing something, you have to follow it. So they created the sort of term mixed reality. You have to now use it. But I think that's equally quite confusing. And I much prefer the term spatial or 3D computing, because what you're really thinking about when you're talking about mixed reality or spatial computing, in the sense that I'm trying to differentiate it, is it's interacting in space. It's understanding that around you in the world, there are areas where you can position content and interact with them in a three-dimensional way and a completely natural way. And that's kind of what I see as being mixed reality and being kind of spatial or 3D computing, as I would prefer to call it. So to give you I suppose to give you an example of that, I mean, like, let's just imagine it's those kind of the IKEA apps where you can put chairs in your room and it looks like it's actually there. Or, you can wear a headset now and look at a wall and turn the wall any color you'd like. It's like, these are more immersive, more interesting experiences that take advantage of the fact that you can interact with them spatially.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. And I've used the one in my talks about Pokemon Go, and as popular as that was, it came on fast and faded out fast, but allowing people to interact, layer on the 3D animation on the real world, obviously an augmented, but now being able to interact, touch the Pokemon, interact with it, in a mixed or spatial experience. So kind of takes a whole other level. So.
Right. I mean, and to be honest, I mean, that's a great example as well, because it's also another kind of differentiation between augmented reality and spatial. So the AR that you see in Pokemon Go is kind of GPS based. So it uses the camera view, but it's really just using the sort of IMU of the device that's looking to give you a 3D experience. So, the pitch, the roll, the yaw, so that you know how you're moving the phone. And we basically just say, hey, in this cardinal direction, there is a Pokemon. Maybe it's a Pidgey or something, right? And it's like, as you look around, it stays where it is. But it's all been launched by the GPS, and it's all being seen by the IMU. And it's technically augmented reality, but it's not spatial computing. Spatial computing would allow you to then walk around and get closer to it. And I know that I'm talking about sort of 15, 16 when Pokemon Go came out, but I know
Right.
they updated it after ARKit and ARCore became a thing, and now you can actually walk around it. And then it kind of took steps towards being more spatial.
Right. Yeah, and I thought what was interesting about it was adding lures and things. Local pizza shops are doing that to bring in traffic. So it was interesting how they were leveraging the technology to actually, increase sales at local businesses. So, it's of course my kids were talking to strangers and trying to jump out of the car. And I thought this is dangerous for for kids, but yeah, it was interesting adoption. People, really got crazy over it. You saw adults doing crazy things too. So it was
Well,
interesting
yeah,
fad.
what was cool. What was cool about it is that the first sort of mass adoption of AR, or mass understanding is probably a better term of phrasing it. And the
Right.
really cool thing about it is, as much as it wasn't true AR, it meant that you could start having a conversation about AR because there was a
Yep.
baseline that had been achieved in the kind of the common vernacular of what AR is. And once that
Yep.
happened, I mean, I remember, some of my previous roles, I remember seeing like a mad influx of people that were interested in mobile AR all of a sudden. They were like, hey, we want to be the next Pokemon Go. We want to do
Right.
this. We want to, and it's like, it drives the industry forward, and it drives awareness, which is one of the key things that you need to increase as you move towards mass adoption.
For sure, yeah, it got people talking about it. I know I was driving in LA with my kids and my 14-year-old son at the time. He's like, "Dad, stop the car." I said, "What? What is it? What is it?" He's like, "There's a Pokemon outside the door." I'm like, I thought I was getting in a car accident. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it definitely got people talking about it for sure. And I meant to this begin the show, but just give a little background. I met Kieran at VRX over in San Francisco and got to try out their wearable and really a lot of cool tech at the show, but one of the things I really like to talk about is your guys' wearable. It's a little bit, it seems unique with the what it does. I'm gonna let you kind of go and take it from here, but tell us a little bit about your guys' headset.
Yeah, sure thing. So the headset that you actually saw at VRX when we met last year was our Gen 1 device. And our Gen 1 device is a kind of monocular display. So the display only comes out of one eye. It's basically like a thick pair of sunglasses that
Mm-hmm.
does all the computing locally and allows you to see an AR display of the world. But we kind of couple that not just with the AR, we focus on the sort of applications of AI as well, so that we work on things where you can couple that technology to sort of provide additional information when you need it at the right times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of used in sort of enterprise and B2B and manufacturing kind of industrial use cases. And it might be,
Mm-hmm.
let's say people are um, manufacturing complex things. They need to reduce information overhead, or it could be that you have a skilled worker offsite who can connect and see what a lesser skilled worker is doing, and you can kind of improve efficiencies in that way. And it's kind of called remote assistance, and that's like a big thing where a lot of companies are pushing at the moment. And then you can use it for kind of things like navigation, or it can increase efficiency in things like pick and packing, just letting you know where things are, or automatically scanning products as you're picking them up. And so what the purpose of our kind of Gen 1 device is purely aimed at that sort of B2B and enterprise approach. What's kind of exciting is that at CES this year, we took a prototype of our new device, which is currently called Aurora, but that's probably going to be subject to change because we've had a kind of legal challenge about that already. So for now, I'm going to refer to it as Project Aurora, which is the legal term that I can use. But basically, it's exciting because it's more of a consumer focused device. So the one that you saw, this one's wildly different. This is
Okay.
it's a dual eye display, and it uses a waveguide optic with a custom light engine. So that means that we basically have the same sort of field of view and clarity that you'd have in the Magic Leap, for example, if you've tried that.
Wow.
But what we're doing is we're focusing more on that sort of consumer market. So we're trying to work out how this device can, I guess, create great experiences for a kind of to consumer approach, but then also a kind of 2B2C. So places where consumers are ultimately using it, but it's being paid for by the brands. Things like stadiums, things like airports, things
Mm-hmm.
like events. Because mass adoption of this kind of technology at consumer level is still a little way away because the technology
Right.
is very expensive and it's still not
Mm-hmm.
very efficient at doing what it needs to do. That's
Mm-hmm.
why the Magic Leap, the HoloLens, they cost like $3,000. They're great
Right.
devices. They do a lot, but no one's buying them, and no
Mm-hmm.
one's using them because they're so expensive. Um, so our new device one of the key things about it is that it acts as a kind of external display. So you can tether it to a mobile device, or you can tether it to any kind of computing device. It's a laptop, desktop, whatever it's going to be, and you can have an experience, and that experience will change slightly depending on what you're tethering to. But the thing that's consistent is that you're having a wearable AR experience. So, for example, what's kind of cool is that you can plug it into your phone right now and take any of the existing apps that you have and then experience them in a new form factor with all the new sensor data.
Wow.
What we think is really cool about that is with AR hardware, and every time a new AR device is launched, you have this thing where there's no ecosystem, or there's a new ecosystem that comes with it. It's like if you want to, if you buy a Magic Leap, you now in their ecosystem, you have to worry with what they can offer you, and you've got to wait for developers to create content for it.
Right.
By building a device that extends what is, the already robust experiences on mobile, we can piggyback off that content. We're not Oculus launching and saying, we've got 1,000 apps, but none of them you want to use. We're saying, hey, your phone is full of content that you find compelling. Why not experience that in a new form factor? So that baseline, that kind of entry level of content is already there. And what we're seeing is that as we plug the device in, and you can experience the apps in wearable, some of them are improved beyond, they become more compelling experiences just by the fact that you've changed the form factor and with zero development, right? But what we're planning and what we're anticipating is that with a small amount of development overhead, developers can start to think about how their app or how their experience might be viewed in wearable, and put a little more effort and then extend it and make it much more compelling by, opening up this additional sensor data that you have, or the depth, or the world mapping from the headset itself. Using the IMU data from the headset. So you're controlling your head, you've got eye tracking. There's all kinds of cool new modes of input, and new kind of multimodal inputs that you have to interact with content spatially that you'll get that can improve those experiences. That's I suppose the other thing is, because this is I usually, when I'm talking about our products, I usually just give it to them so people can hold it, but at the moment I can't do that. I'm just giving it to you. So it's kind of like, it looks like a really sleek kind of headset that goes all the way around the head. Somewhere between a cross between a kind of Geordie LaForge visor and a really smart pair of sunglasses. The best way to describe what I'm looking for.
Well, what kind of drew me to your guys' headset? Looking at obviously the other headsets that are out there. Especially people said, VR, they're big, they're bulky headsets. They've gotten a little bit smaller. But, looking at AR, that's one of the biggest things, or spatial is just, the headsets. And what I really loved about your guys, it almost looks like sunglasses. It's pretty darn close as far as what I've seen out there. Something that, because that's the thing people say, well, I don't want to wear that in public. I don't want to look silly. But with your guys' headset, it almost looks like something that somebody would wear on a normal day-to-day basis, and people wouldn't think twice about it.
Right. And, you've touched on to one of the kind of core design philosophies of what we're doing and why we believe that we're going to be a success in this space. And it's especially prevalent in the kind of enterprise and B2B markets as well, beyond the kind of consumer stuff that we're focused on. But we design things that create compelling and interesting and, at their core, delightful experiences. The user experience is at the core of every design choice that we make. And what we're finding, especially in the enterprise space, is no one gets that. These devices, these sort of wearable displays that help people, become more efficient or do something with more accuracy, faster. It's basically an assistive device, and it's an assistive device for a human that is always, always present somewhere in that chain of commands that is being executed. That human is always consistently there. So at worst, that person needs to feel comfortable both operating the device and wearing it socially. And that's something that we really keep in mind. And we understand that for people to sort of take the step of adopting something, it needs to be positioned to them in a way that it makes sense to them. So I think in terms of adopting new hardware like this, you really just have to focus on one way of positioning it to them, that it kind of fits naturally in with the routine that they're already okay with. Because in terms of adopting, no one wants to break their routine or break their habits because you tell them to. But what they do
Right.
want to do is improve things that they already enjoy. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
focus on one thing that somebody really enjoys and say, hey, if you use
Mm-hmm.
our device, this part of your life that you already take a lot of pleasure from, this can improve in drastic ways. And once they're on board with that, they try it, and then they realize, hey, all these other things that I can use it for, it actually improves those too. And that's now additional benefits. But the kind of key learning is that people aren't going to change their routines and use your device if you can't position it in a way that it fits in with what they want to do.
Right. No, I totally agree. One of the things that, when I've done presentations on, VR and AR, and I've had people ask me, what about, AI and other elements, and I said, you're really going to start to see wearables, everything's going to come together. One thing that kind of struck me is I had lunch with Gary V at a big event and got to have lunch with him. And he really talked a lot about voice recognition. And, as you look at, wearables and things like that, having that integration piece to it where it's their voice commands. Can you tell me a little about kind of the next few years and kind of where you see voice interacting with your guys' headset?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a very interesting point that you brought up, because rather than just voice interacting with our headsets, I think that voice is going to be an essential sort of change of how we interact generally. So I
Mm,
think at the moment, the way that I'd like to sort of take my response to this question, at the moment, I feel like
sure.
we use 2D interfaces to input
Mm,
data. Like we're using a mouse and keyboard, on a phone, you're using a touchscreen to tap commands and options, and you're basically using a UI that is allowing you to have a conversation that makes sense, right? So
right.
it's like you're tapping on a button and you're basically just having a conversation in the computer's or the specific application's language. But what we're going to see in the coming years is that conversational AI is going to become a main part or a mainstay of a central UI for pretty much everything. Like you're going to be able
Mm,
to, access a program or something that you're using and just ask it how it works and ask it to make itself operate. You're basically just going to remove the friction of needing to learn a UI, and it's going to become conversational as
right.
sort of AI and machine learning really improves to the point where this is ready to scale up. And I think that's really
Mm,
exciting, because not only then do you have the sort of immediate benefits that you'll see, but you'll just get I suppose the fact that you're not going to ask people to go outside of their way to learn something. It'll be
right.
much more easier for people to do general tasks, because they'll be able
Mm.
to speak the same language as the software that they are trying to operate.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think it's going to be a game changer across a lot of industries, especially with AR and VR. I think it's going to be a huge component of it. So no, that's awesome. Um, Looking out, going out to 2045, obviously the name of the podcast. Really seeing the future. Where do you see the future of wearables and XR spatial experiences?
Sure. So yeah, I think in terms of the future of this kind of market, um, 2045 is a long way away, and I get that it's a super exciting thing to think about. And honestly, if I was able to accurately predict, I feel like I might be the next billionaire that's trying to cure malaria. But I think what I can do is try and give you my perspective, uh, based on my experience, and understand that I'm not a futurist. But I think
Mhm.
what I do is I tend to focus on, I think, more less about potential futures and more about actual futures. I think so. I think the capacity of my job, it kind of teaches me to think about as far out as current technology and understanding allows me to see a sort of beneficial
Mhm.
direction, and then I can pursue that to make an incremental change over a number of cycles that add up to a lot.
Sure.
And so I think, in the next kind of 2 years, we're going to see a slew of low cost head mount displays, because
Mhm.
the manufacturing and optics, and the sort of technological advancements are going to mean that that's a thing. You're going to see devices, like you said, that look like sunglasses and that allow you to
Right.
do incredible things. Um, you
Mhm.
know, 5 years from now, tethers are going to be removed. So at the moment, I'm talking about tethering to a mobile device. But in 5 years, with the sort of the improvement of sort of edge computing infrastructures and 5G, and when that starts to roll out across a large number of wearable devices that you might have across your body, tethers can be removed, and you can push computing power to different devices and then do most of it on the edge. So that's another thing. And then I'd say, in sort of 10 years from now, I believe that the smartphone will be replaced as the main computing sort of assistant that a person uses, and there'll be something better. 2045 is it's a great thing to think about, and I think for me the best way to kind of think a little bit further is to assume that the technologies that I work with, they don't operate in a vacuum. So I think that there's going to be enormous advancements in certain fields, things like alternate fuel, nanotechnology, and genetic engineering, as well as things like the combination of spatial computing, AI, and machine learning. And these things are all going to change society in ways that we can't even understand right now. I mean, to put it into perspective, I told you that I started out in television. When I went to university, it was almost 15 years ago, and I studied film production. And I studied film production, and the cameras we were using were, like the size of a small microwave that you had on your shoulder, and they were not very good quality. Right, they were not very good quality cameras, right? And the thing is, the camera that I have in my pocket right now on my iPhone that I'm using is drastically better quality than the one I was using to perform my studies 15 years ago, right? And but here's the interesting thing. So that is a change that I can understand and I could have anticipated coming, because assuming that technology gets smaller and more compact and also higher quality over time, with the way that the research is developing, that makes sense. That's a change that makes sense to me. So even a change as drastic as that makes sense, but there's changes coming which we can't anticipate because they don't make sense. They're going to be entirely new things that have never been considered. Right, exactly. It's going to be an entirely new sort of technological revolution that is potentially coming. And in 2045, I feel like the world might be a very, very different place. I think the way that I would like to look at it, or the way that I do look at it, is to think less about the kind of broad strokes of how society will look, but then to try and focus on one thing. So, I mean, for example, education. Like, what will the classroom of tomorrow look like? This is something that I think is hugely interesting. So, like the combinations of spatial computing, AI, and machine learning, and these things, and how that will influence the classroom of tomorrow. So, let's see. At the moment, I would say, the education system that we have, it's pretty much a terrible way to educate efficiently, right? But what it is, it's a great way to mitigate the overwhelming problem of educating en masse and on budget, right? So what we have is one teacher that sees, 40 kids at a time and tries to divide their time equally among those 40 kids. And it doesn't make sense. But once you start really trying to apply technology in innovative ways and revolutionize something, you could have a system of education where each individual child could have an individual curriculum that is tailored to them, and using, let's say, a personal AI that keeps track of their progress. And that system of curriculum that they have, if they're performing well, it can push them harder to perform even better. If they're underperforming, it can give them additional tasks that might help bring them back up to that lowest level of understanding that they need to have. And then all the time you can have teachers sort of floating around this environment, providing that additional support that people might need, and being able to effectively allocate their time. And then spatial computing in this kind of sense, there's already studies that are showing the benefits of AR and spatial computing in learning and retention. So you can then have sort of students that would use HMD devices or spatial devices that would allow them to, learn in deeper and new ways, maybe concepts and ideas that they've never been able to visualize and understand. They can do better, or they can try dangerous things or things that they've never been able to do inside a classroom and get some learning experience from it. And kind of beyond that, what's really exciting to me is that in making a change of this kind of scale, and I'd say at the moment in education, like every year you might get in each school in a kind of year group, you might have one or two people who identify themselves as brilliant and then go on to do great things, right? But that doesn't mean that they're the only brilliant people in the classroom. What it means is that they were able to identify themselves. they were given the support that they needed, and they had a mind that was good enough for them to show that they were great. But there are a ton of other kids in that class that might have a similar potential if they get the right level of education. So what I find extremely exciting about this is that on a yearly basis, we're going to start to see more and more brilliant people being identified. And those brilliant kids become the brilliant CEOs of tomorrow that change the world that we live in for the better. And what I'm really excited about when I start thinking about education is that the world that we live in, and as great and as interesting, as wonderful as it is, it's been built by those one or two brilliant people that have come out and been able to define what it should look like. When we start getting an influx of brilliant people over a long time, I'm really excited to see about these kinds of changes that, people, non-brilliant people like myself can't even understand or imagine what might be possible in 2045. So I think I suppose that's kind of my take on the whole thing. I'm just excited for the potential, for the human potential that exists through the application of technology.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I have a newborn. He's 6 months now, so a little bit older. But I think about the world that he's going to grow up in, and I think about the educational system as it is now, and how different that's going to be by the time he's in high school and college. And ASU out here, Arizona State University, they just added a virtual reality or program in VR that's part of the biology program. So you actually do your lab in VR. It's the first time doing it. They're trying it out, but it's neat to see, accredited large universities like this say, hey, you know what, let's try to integrate this technology into our curriculum and test it out. So I think it's especially those universities that are looking to try it, it's pretty exciting to see this happening. So,
right.
That's awesome. As we wrap up here, is there anything that you'd like to add that maybe we didn't talk about, or?
There's one more thing I'd like to add. So, a little bit more near term than 2045. I think I wanted to sort of just talk about what I'm expecting will happen in my sort of industry in the next couple of years, and the big thing that is going to define it. So I think for me, what I really think is coming in mixed reality, spatial computing, whatever you want to call it, is a definition, a clear definition of what an augmented reality or spatial experience is. Because at the moment, it's so fragmented that people can't really understand. Like I said, you can have a heads-up display and you can have a Magic Leap experience, and both of those are technically the same thing. But I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be some design leadership in this space. So the hardware is now catching up, and people have been working in VR and spatial for a while. But what we really need to do is take these learnings and get some design leadership to standardize a methodology of what an AR experience is, like a kind of lowest common denominator of an AR experience. It allows you to do this, it allows you to do that, so that people can know what to expect. And once that happens, then I think you're going to get devices to match. Because at the moment, the devices out there, they're all doing everything, and that's why they're so expensive. And that's why it doesn't really work for mass adoption. But what we need is a clearer definition so that we can then say, this is the base level. This provides an AR experience. And if you buy it, then you can have an AR experience. And that's kind of what is coming. And I think as a company, that's kind of what we're focused on. We're not focused on adding all the bells and whistles and creating these amazing experiences that you can do anything with. What we're interested in is stripping those down and being kind of laser focused on what is necessary to achieve the experience that people want. Because what people want to do is pay a smaller amount of money and have an experience that is, great enough by their estimation. What they don't want to do is pay tons of money, and then have the potential to do anything, but then never actually actualize any of it. So I think the one thing that I wanted to say as my kind of prediction for what's coming in this space and this industry in the next couple of years is a clear definition, led by great design leadership like content creators, of what an AR experience or spatial experience is.
That's awesome. I think that's a really cool way of looking at it, and I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Well, Kieran, I really appreciate your time and being on the show. I think this was just awesome information. I know that our listeners really enjoy it. So thank you again, my friend, and we'll be in touch soon. Hope to see you. Look forward to seeing you at the next show.
Yeah, no problem. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. Talk to you
Bye
later.
bye.